Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pari Center and our Book a Month Club. Today, physicist Jonathan Allday will explain Quantum Questions, Mystical Writings of the World's Great Physicists, edited by Ken Wilber. Jonathan Allday did his first degree in natural sciences at PhD in elementary particle physics in Liverpool. Jonathan worked as a physics teacher for 30 years in a variety of independent day and boarding schools in the UK. He was head of physics, head of science, and academic deputy head. He retired in 2020 and now runs a consulting company providing training and educational advice for schools. I will now hand things over to Jonathan.
I'm going to explain quantum questions, am I? Oof, that's setting the bar a little bit high. Thanks for that one.
No pressure, no pressure.
No pressure at all. Evening or whatever time of day it is to everybody. Thank you so many people for turning up. I hope this is a fun and enjoyable evening for you as well. When I was asked if I would do one of these, it didn't take me more than a few seconds to decide which book I wanted to talk about or introduce to you. This book came to me, I must confess, at rather a dark time. I discover from the inside flap, it was around about May 2002. And we've become fast friends ever since. And it's like the nature of all friendships, I guess. When you form a close friendship to somebody, you want to introduce them to everybody else that you know, and you hope desperately they'll get on well with everybody else. And so likewise, I've been singing the praises of this book wherever possible. And hopefully people find it as useful, as stimulating, and as enjoyable as I do and I did. I'm going to confess, obviously, that it's a long time since I actually read it from cover to cover. It's generally on my shelf as a kind of dip in and out of book. And it's been very interesting and rewarding to read it from cover to cover again for today. And I'm pleased to say that my opinion of it hasn't diluted as a result of that. In the passing of 20 odd years, it has not, its impact hasn't reduced for me. I guess I said it came to me in sort of a dark time. And I guess what I'm alluding to there really is that for me, at least, it's very helpful to be able to pluck a book like this off the shelf and discover that the path you're treading, or at least the path that you're attempting to tread, others have walked before. Far better minds than yours have walked before in front of you, and a kind of signaling that it's okay, the way you're headed isn't nonsense, it isn't dangerous, it is a well-trodden path. And that reassurance for me is part of what makes this book of great value to me personally. When I was a much younger physicist, I was very influenced by a book called The Tao of Physics, which I'm sure will be very familiar to most, if not all of you out there. In fact, it was the Tao of Physics that made me into a particle physicist. I wanted to do that for my research pretty much from the age of 15 or 16. So first degree in physics and then on to do a PhD in particle physics, I think almost entirely due to the influence of that book. And so it's very interesting to come back N years later and to read Wilber's critique, well-meaning, not nasty, but gently correcting that book, and to appreciate that. And I guess some of the shortcomings that I may have sensed in it since then, again, Wilber agreed with me, or I agreed with him, probably more. Now, it's the nature of the beast, isn't it? I'm a teacher. I've got a little PowerPoint presentation, which I would like to put up and talk a little bit about the book from there, that context. But I'm absolutely sure that if there's any value to what we're doing today, it's going to be the conversations that you guys have about the book. So I want to get onto that as quickly as possible. But I do want to put a few things in some context, if I may. So let me just see if I can get the technology to work, share the screen. Can someone just reassure me that you are actually seeing the presentation there?
Yes, you're good, Jonathan.
Okay. So, Quantum Questions, Ken Wilber's book. I'm afraid I couldn't resist this as a second slide. And some of you may get the implicit joke in the title of that as well. But I've got to side with Weisskopf here. When things get tough, there are two things in life that make it worth living: Mozart and quantum mechanics. You know, I'm there with you, Weisskopf. You know, we're on the same side. Ken Wilber. I'd be very interested to hear what people's thoughts about Ken Wilber's part of this book are. Personally, I find Ken Wilber's work a little bit uneven. In some of his books, I haven't read all of them by any means. I've read 5 or 6. Some of his books I find marvelous and enchanting. Others I find a little bit technical, a little bit polemic, a little bit too detailed. I think when he's summarizing things, he's a master. But when he's trying to explain and justify and maybe be a little bit more academic, I don't warm to him quite as well. But again, I do think he does a very, very good job in this book. Now, what I've done as I've read through it again is I've plucked out phrases from, obviously here from Ken Wilber, but also from the various physicists that really struck me. I've tried to limit myself to about 3 for each. And I was just interested to see if they resonated with you guys as well, and indeed whether you had some thoughts, some quotes that you wanted to bring to the table. So from Wilber's introduction, I offer modern physics offers no positive support, let alone proof, for a mystical worldview. If today's physics supports mysticism, what happens when tomorrow's physics replaces it? And that to me is one of the most significant things that Wilber emphasizes, that it is dangerous and short-sighted to try and justify a mystical worldview on the back of some physics, because it could be washed away in the next tide. And that, I think, is one of the shortcomings of something like the Tao of Physics, albeit it's a very valuable book. In the mystical consciousness, reality is apprehended directly and immediately. The physicist is looking at nothing but a set of highly abstract differential equations, not at reality itself, but at mathematical symbols of reality. And again, reading this cover to cover for the first time in a long time, one of the things that powerfully struck me is how often mathematics comes up. Now, I know that mathematics is a language and a topic that is intimidating to many that naturally swim in such waters, but there's no real mathematics quoted in the book. It's the significance of mathematics that is drawn out so forcefully by so many of these physicists. And I think that's something we're all capable of offering an opinion about. Now, whenever you have a book of this sort, it's undoubtedly the case that you could be accused of selection bias. And it has to be said that amongst the founders of quantum theory, Paul Dirac does stick out as being someone with very anti-religious sentiments. Having said that, I did do how effective can it be? But I did spend an hour or so trawling around the internet, looking at quotes from all of what you might call the founding figures in quantum theory on their religious sentiments, and didn't find very many at all other than Dirac. So Wilber's assertion that of those initial figures, many did have some religious sentiment may be justified. Maybe the majority, maybe that is justified. Certainly, I couldn't find anyone as outspoken as Dirac amongst that sample. Of course, it could alternatively be that it's only the ones that have those sorts of sentiments that felt able to speak about it publicly. But I think we know from modern times that the anti-religious, those with anti-religious sentiments, don't tend to be backwards at coming forwards. So I don't know, perhaps there is something to be said about that. Of course, you know, when it comes to reviews of the book, then Peter Atkins, who is a well-known or was a well-known anti-religious person, he feels that Wilber's charmingly seductive introduction gives you some sympathy with these night thoughts. Night thoughts, they're at night, so they can't really be of significance, can they? Of course, there is no resolution of the central question, and there is a great deal of foggy twaddle peddled by the pessimistic. Yet amongst the twaddle, there are thoughts worth thinking. Thank you, Peter. It's reassuring for you to say that. Those of the mind attuned to the deeper problems of the world will find little satisfaction from this volume, presumably because the answers presented here don't appeal to Peter. Anyway, that is an example of one of the reviews which shows that you can't convince everybody. Now, for me, it's slightly a bit of a shame in some ways. Again, be interested to hear what youth people think. Slightly a shame that Wilber chose to start with Heisenberg. And the reason I say that is because although Heisenberg is absolutely one of my great heroes when it comes to physics, and indeed his philosophical writings and his philosophical thinking about quantum theory, I value very, very highly. But I don't find him very easy to read. And I hope that people who attempted to read this book didn't get a little put off by what I think is the slightly stilted language that Heisenberg uses. I have read his autobiography. There's a chapter from it here, and he talks about the various conversations he has with people and quotes these conversations. Can't quite believe that people actually spoke the way that he quotes them. But nevertheless, things that struck me reading Heisenberg again. Niels has quoted, "Truth dwells in the deeps." I love that phrase. By the way, you'll note that I've decorated some of these slides with other quotations about these people outside of the context of the book. And if people want a copy of this presentation, perhaps because one of the things said there they feel is of value to them, then simply, obviously, I'll be very happy to provide it. I do love the one in the middle there to do with Heisenberg, the first gulp of natural sciences. I think that's a wonderful quote. Anyway, back to the book itself. In this early phase of modern science, the newly discovered conformity to mathematical law has become the true basis of its persuasive power. The smallest units of matter are, in fact, not physical objects in the ordinary sense of the word. They are forms, structures, or in Plato's sense, ideas, which can be unambiguously spoken of only in the language of mathematics. Here starts the recurring theme that there is something significant, not just about mathematics, but about the type of mathematics being used. On to Schrödinger, who comes a little bit as, a gentle relief after what I think is a slightly turgid language of Heisenberg. And forgive me for putting the Terry Pratchett quote in there in the middle there. But again, one I couldn't resist. This notion of Schrödinger's cat having two states, alive or dead. Pratchett posits the third state, bloody furious, which I think is the high probability collapse of the state function. Science sometimes here's Schrödinger. Science sometimes pretends to answer questions in these spiritual domains, but the answers are very often so silly, we're not inclined to take them seriously. Say, stuff that, Atkins. There really is no before or after for mind. There is only a now that includes memories and expectations. This life of yours, which you are living, is not merely a piece of the entire existence, but is in a certain sense the whole. Only this whole is not so constituted that it can be surveyed in one single glance. I was really quite surprised and a little bit dismayed. I mentioned earlier that I did a bit of a trawl looking for sentiments from the founding figures to illustrate maybe some anti-religious sentiments. And I came across a Wikipedia page listing the great atheists in science. And Schrödinger was amongst them. Now that is, for me, a gross misreading of what Schrödinger had to say. And indeed, there were several scientists quoted amongst this list of great atheists in science who I feel were nothing of the sort. Einstein, well known as one of the great geniuses of physics of the era, indeed of ever, but I think in many ways was intellectually matched by certainly more than one of the people within this volume, albeit Einstein's physical imagination outstripped them. Individual existence impresses him as a sort of prison, and he wants to experience the universe as a single significant whole. Significance, again, is another theme that comes out from many of the physicists here. The sense of significance is a guide to reality. I think it's Eddington who argues along those lines. A religious person is devout in the sense that he has no doubt of the significance and loftiness of those superpersonal objects and goals which neither require nor are capable of rational foundation. But whoever has undergone the intense experience of successful advances made in this domain is moved by profound reverence for the rationality made manifest in existence. And again, here's another sub-theme that's coming out. The moment of discovery, that great intellectual joy, that feeling of rightness, that feeling of the alignment between the mathematics and the world, which brings with it intense delight and pleasure. Even someone who scrabbled around on the foothills of physics like I did actually had that experience on a couple of occasions during the courses of my research. What could it have been like for someone of the qualities of Einstein? But I know whereof he speaks there, and I'm sure many others do as well. De Broglie, it is to have from time to time the divine joy of discovering such harmonies that pure science works without sparing its toil or seeking for profit. Many of the physicists quoted here speak of how difficult physics is. You know, to do physics research. Why would someone dedicate their lives to such hard, unceasing toil? Without meaning to overstate the case, but I think that's paraphrasing what somebody says. It is these moments that give it that immense pleasure, that give it that feeling that is all worthwhile. And even if you glimpse maybe once or twice like I did, it still justifies the approach. The great wonder in the progress of science is it has revealed to us a certain agreement between our thoughts and things. Genes, really moving into quality writers here, I think. Be interested to hear what your views on the relative writing abilities of these people. Nature seems very conversant with the rules of pure mathematics. I have to confess, reading this again, there were a couple of occasions which genuinely brought goosebumps to the back of my neck. And certainly a couple of James's quotes did that. Most assuredly, Eddington, who I'm going to come to later, did raise goosebumps for me. In brief, mathematics enters the universe from above instead of from below. Well, I'd like to say a little bit more about what he means by that, or at least what I think he means by that. In that there are two aspects to how mathematics is engaged in physics. When we do an experiment, even an experiment as simple and straightforward as the ones tend to be in schools, we take measurements and we plot graphs and we draw a line through those data points. And if your way of doing experiments is anything like mine, then it's a chaos of data points and you're struggling to find a line that kind of goes through and represents them. That, I think, is what he means by mathematics appearing from below. We are distilling the mathematics, or trying to impose or place, is a better phrase, our mathematics on top of the data to see how it works. But he's suggesting there's another aspect to this as well, that when you actually generate a mathematical theory that explains your data, you're not trying to fit the data, you're trying to explain it now. The mathematics that has come out in modern physics is so profound, is so beautiful, and is so outside the realm of everyday experience that it seems to come into the world from above rather than being abstracted out of the world from below. I think that's what Jeans is driving at here. And I think it was Jeans, and I'm sure it was Eddington as well, who made comment on this. We do know another physicist who has talked about the unreasonable claims of mathematics, or the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. And it seems to me that the jump between a Neanderthal man, Ugg, throwing a rock at a wildebeest so that he may eat that night, the mathematics, in inverted commas, required to instinctively know the trajectory to throw the rock, the gulf between that and tensor calculus is so vast, it seems implausible to me that it can be spanned just simply by natural selection. Something more is at work here. It's hard to, and that's what Eddington, Jeans is alluding to next. Hard to believe that such intricate concepts as finite curved space and an expanding space can have entered into pure mathematics through any sort of unconscious or subconscious experience of the workings of the actual universe. That's Ugg throwing the rock. You know, undoubtedly mathematics may have had its start then, but it's gone far beyond that. Planck. It is so that when we approach the inner springs of human action, science cannot have the last word. And here we're turning towards to what extent science is applicable to our inner world. Every advance in knowledge brings us face to face with the mystery of our own being. As Einstein has said, you could not be a scientist if you did not know that the external world existed in reality. But that knowledge is not gained by any process of reasoning. And there's an argument, I think, again, that Eddington picks up on later in the book. We don't get to meet Pauli directly. Ken Wilber shied away from actually including any of Pauli's original writings, but we do get to meet him by proxy via Heisenberg, and actually in a much more easy to read chapter, I think, than Heisenberg's own. The most satisfactory course, it seems, is to introduce at this point the postulate of an order of the cosmos distinct from the world of appearances, and not a matter of our choice. The delight one feels on becoming aware of a new piece of knowledge arises from the way such pre-existing images fall into congruence with the behavior of external objects. Hang on, what's he trying to say here? Again, he's alluding to the delight of discovery, that when one finds that the abstract mathematical thoughts engendered by the pure mathematicians correspond to reality in a very deep and significant way. How is that possible? Why is that possible? And for those who have experienced it, that is a significance that's impossible to ignore. And I would say it's even tantamount to a mystical glimpse at reality. From an inner center, the mind seems to move outwards in a sort of extroversion into the physical world, in which all happenings are assumed to be automatic, so that the spirit serenely encompasses the physical world as it were with his ideas. Well, now we come to Eddington. And I have to confess, you've probably gathered from what I've said thus far, that I adore Eddington. You know, I did say this is a book that I used to pick up off the shelf. Almost invariably, it's to Eddington that I turn. Wilber makes reference to his wit, his lucidity of phrase, and I think also the profundity of his thought. Therefore, I have indulged myself. You probably think I've indulged myself by talking far too long and such nonsense already. I've indulged myself on paper by quoting Eddington a little bit more extensively. A great many aspects of our ordinary life and activity take us outside the outlook of physics. For the most part, no controversy arises as to the admissibility and importance of these aspects. We take their validity for granted and adapt our life to them without any deep self-questioning. Any discussion as to whether they're compatible with the truth revealed by physics, purely academic. Whatever the outcome of the discussion, we're not likely to sacrifice them, knowing as we do at the outset that the nature of man would be incomplete without such outlets. It's therefore somewhat of an anomaly that among the many extra physical aspects of experience, religion alone should be singled out as especially in need of reconciliation with the knowledge contained in science. What I believe Eddington is saying here is, hang on, folks. Some feel the need to try and justify or align religion with science, particularly with physics, and see where the conflicts lie. If we really believed physics, our everyday experiences in ordinary life would equally be in need of alignment, because physics stands incapable of explaining consciousness. Physics stands incapable of explaining our basic emotional reactions to the world. And yet, we don't necessarily feel in need of rejecting those. We don't necessarily feel in need of arguing with the physicists that these are the case. But when it comes to religion, we do. So I think what Eddington is saying here is, hang on, the problem lies earlier than that. The world as described by physics is not yet the world that we can imagine ourselves living in. The bearing of the physical science on religion, and this is the one that brings goosebumps to me. It's happening even now, I have to confess. The bearing of physical science on religion is that the scientist has, from time to time, assumed the duty of a signalman and set up warnings of danger, not always unwisely. If I interpret the present situation rightly, a mainline signal which had been standing at danger has now been lowered. Nothing much is going to happen unless there is an engine. Now, I'll put that next to the following quote, which I have to confess, I've been confessing a lot, haven't I? Get rid of that turn of phrase, Jonathan, which I must say, I only found about half an hour ago and slotted in. There was a time, and this is linking those two things together. There was a time when the whole combination of self and environment, which makes up experience, seemed likely to pass under the dominion of a physics much more iron-bound than it is now. That overweening phase, when it was almost necessary to ask the permission of physics to call one's soul one's own, is past. In other words, there was a time when Newtonian physics was the be-all and end-all, that the world was a strict causal web. And on the back of that view of physics, some of us and philosophers lost our nerve. And we started to treat ourselves as if we were mechanisms. We started to say things like we have no free will in order to align ourselves with physics. And for me, and I'm sure for Eddington, the real message of quantum theory is we should have held fast to our intuitions. If we have the intuition and basic experience of free will and all those other things that go up to make our internal life, and those do not align with physics, so much the worse for physics. But it must be said that the quantum revolution, and for me, the real significance of the quantum revolution is it has moved us nearer. We're not there yet, but it has moved us nearer to describing a world in which we can imagine that we exist. That iron-bound causal stranglehold has been lifted. So there's our array of physicists. And I have to say, reflecting back on this group and thinking of Eddington's Scottish person without a sense of humor, my mind did turn to Monty Python and that glorious, glorious thing where they set up a football match between the Greek philosophers and the German philosophers. And that profound moment, Socrates scores, got a beautiful cross in from Archimedes, the Germans are disputing it, Hegel is arguing that the reality is merely an a priori adjunct of the non-naturalistic ethic. Kant, via the categorical imperative, is holding that ontologically, if it exists, only in the imagination, and Marx is claiming it was offside. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. You know, that's still, oh, wow. Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Humor. Not enough is done on the philosophy of humor. Marx is claiming it was offside. So my mind turned to, if I was to put these physicists into a football match, where would I put them? Right. Okay. So Einstein for me goes in the defense. Goes in the goal. Einstein, rightly, I think, could be thought of as one of the last of the classical physicists rather than the new wave of the quantum physicists. I would put Planck and I would have De Broglie in the defense. Jeans out there on the wing. Schrödinger, front of the midfield, I think. For me, the strikers are Heisenberg and Eddington. But hang on, I do not have a complete team. I need to go further. Oh, but we do have Pauli. Now, we don't know very much about Pauli because we only found him by proxy, so I'm partly sticking him on the side with the oranges. Also, I think he's a little bit of a loose cannon, so we might want to bring him on as a substitute. But I do need more players. So I offer you Niels Bohr, who goes to the Upanishads to ask questions. And there are two sets of truths, trivialities where the opposite is equally absurd, and a profound truth where the opposite is also a profound truth. Me, I'm going to stick Bohr in the middle of the defense where he can argue with Einstein. Max Born. Those who say the study of science makes man an atheist must be rather silly people. I'm now convinced that theoretical physics is actually philosophy. There we go. Where are we going to put Born? Born is there in the middle of the defense. Now, I've got to go slightly out of time here. I've got to go slightly out of the main. But again, one of my great heroes in physics, Freeman Dyson. The more I examine the universe and study its details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe must in some way have known that we were coming. That's another one that gives me goosebumps. Freeman Dyson, where are you? There you sit. But of course, it occurs to me, we need a coach. And I was going to leave it there, to be honest with you. I was going to leave it as a question for you to ponder. And this morning, I woke up and, oh my God, it was obvious. Who else? David, come to our aid and be the coach. Okay. I now propose that we break out into various discussion groups to firstly sit in stunned silence and say, what was that idiot on about? And then settle down to either discussing the book, enjoying a glass of wine at the same time. But I'm a teacher, so I've set you some questions to get you going. Maybe you have other questions, but I would be interested if you would address at least a couple of these, because I'd be genuinely interested to hear your answers. Which physicists do you think were the best writers? Like me, were there any particular phrases or perhaps paragraphs that these physicists used that stuck out at you? Were you surprised by any of their views? Why do you think all of these physicists had a mystical outlook? Was it because of their physics, or did they have it as well as their physics? How significant is mathematics for all the physicists? Do Wilber's introductions and editorials help? And putting aside all this technical sort of stuff, you know, a book club, we need to have these slightly intellectual questions. Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Is it a book that you would recommend to others? As I've said, it's a dear friend of mine. Perhaps some of what I've said has made you understand why it's a dear friend of mine, even though you can't come squarely alongside it yourselves. But how's that? 36 minutes. Michael was expressing skepticism that I could do 30, being a teacher, normally used to speaking in 50-minute blocks. 36, come on, that's not bad.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I'll admit it. Absolutely.
Okay, shall we break these people out? I'm going to stop sharing this. I can always, if there's anything that people find there of any interest, I can come back to it later. What do we do? Do we put people directly into breakout rooms now? Do people want to ask any immediate questions? Do people want to run for the hills? This is the time. This is your time. Eleanor, thoughts?
All right. If somebody would like to ask a question, they're welcome to come in now. Otherwise, the idea was to go into breakaway groups and have a little bit of time together. Who doesn't want to join a group? That's fine. You can just stay in the main room, and then we'll all come back together and share what happened in the breakaway group. So if there aren't any questions, I would say then let's go for it. We'll do the breakaway group. So you'll see an invitation. Who doesn't want to join a group? Just stay in the main room, and when we all come back, then it's your opportunity if you'd like to ask a question. Okay, so I'll send out the invite now for everybody to join. Jonathan, at this point, would you like to open it up for question and answers? What would you?
Yeah, or unless anyone wants to immediately feedback on what went on in their conversations, you know,
Absolutely.
it's a fireside chat, this, as far as I'm concerned. Let's not be too rigid.
We've got another 20 minutes together, so let's use this time. If anyone would like to talk about what they talked about in their breakaway groups, or if you have any questions for Jonathan, we invite you to come in now. You can use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen, or you can physically raise your hand and I'll look out for you. So Richard, please come in.
Unmute myself. Okay.
You're good.
Well, we started to talk a little bit about, well, a whole bunch of things. A very exciting group, but we got into a little bit of a question around epistemology and ontology, and David Bohm's interest in ontology around worldviews, undivided, divided, etc. So my question really is in thinking of the team you put together, what prompted you to decide that David Bohm was probably the best one to be the coach?
A moment of inspiration. It just occurred to me that it was absolutely the right person to pick within the context of Pari. But also, I guess, as I think his physics intuition was probably the one amongst everybody's there that rivaled Einstein's. I had the great pleasure of a conversation with his collaborator Basil Hiley before Christmas. A few hours spent in Basil's company is delightful. And I asked him that very question: what would David Bohm's strength? And he said his intuition, his ability to look at reality and append what it was. I think Basil was is probably technically a better mathematician, but to be a good physicist, the intuition is paramount, and we see that in Einstein as well. So as a means of kind of herding the group, I thought his intuition would be the guidepost. And also, I think that his notion of the implicate order of reality, I think they would all agree with, they would all find sympathy with. More so, I suspect, than they might find direct sympathy with some of each other's views. I think that might be a unifying thing for them. But in the end, it was a moment of intuition and a slight attempt at humor.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Richard.
I think it was a good one.
Damaris, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the summary. I also enjoyed some of the book. I read some of the book, not all of it. So I was very curious about the question you brought up about mathematics, the language of mathematics. And really, as somebody who has not read the whole book, would love your perspective on what might be the common theme on the language of mathematics. Like reading Heisenberg, it sounded very much like, okay, mathematics is great in terms of like the level 1 or A that Ken Wilber says, but like if we go to the other level, it's 4 and 5, you know, we need other language, and Heisenberg says that's fine, you know, we just got to be aware of that, and then ramifications around that. Is that something that you found were reflected in all the other physicists too? Is that something that you would say is fair, or has maybe by now been replaced by something else?
I think that the significance of the mathematics for all of them was twofold, which on both of these, I accept that someone who isn't, I mean, I wouldn't class myself as a fluent mathematician. I'm a competent mathematician. But I have had both of these experiences personally. And I'm conscious that if you haven't had them, but there are similar experiences that people can have. That moment when it just clicks, when you actually grasp something about the world, is an incredibly creative and, you know, powerful emotional moment. When you solve the equation and it comes out to be a nice, beautiful, simple solution, or even better, certainly not in my case, you see a glimpse of a new law of nature. And it's that powerful emotional significance. And I believe, and I think they believed, that, again, this was in the foothills of mysticism. I've talked about, in my view, there's a Platonic layer of reality, and the physicist who does that creative moment pulls something out of that. And I think the true mystic drills even deeper, but they're both doing something similar. They're appending something in reality and pulling it out. So I think that's one significance. The other significance is more to do with the modern physics, the quantum physics or whatever, which they talk, where the mathematics that's effective is so surprising that, you know, without wanting to bore people about mathematics itself, but quantum physics requires what's known as complex numbers. And these were invented, or possibly better, appended by the mathematicians with no thought whatsoever that there would ever be of use in describing the world. And yet they are. You know, they are profoundly useful. In fact, you cannot do quantum theory without them. So how is it that something that was pulled out in pure mathematics, the most esoteric of pure mathematics, that you'd never think had any contact with the world, suddenly becomes crucial in describing the world? And I think it's that feeling that some allude to as being, you know, the mental aspect of the world. Many of the physicists here are saying that the world is mind stuff. And I think that's what they mean by that there's this resonance between the mathematics that we can dream up, if you're one view, or we can intuit out of the world, if you're another view, actually is kind of what the world is made of. And that's incredible. And that's too significant to be just brushed under the carpet. I think it's those two aspects which interleave, which come through from all of them. Does that in any sense give you a glimpse of what I'm driving at?
So you are saying that in the book it is implied that we can use math to help us gain access to understanding in the higher levels, not just level 1.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. As a starting point, I wouldn't claim it gets you any further. Ken Wilber, you know, I think does have a patchy reputation perhaps amongst, but one point I do give him credit, I love, is one of his sayings: physics may reveal the mind of God, but only if he happens to be thinking about dirt. And that sums up, I think, what we're trying to say.
Great, thank you both. Max, please come in.
Yes, well, this is absolutely wonderful, and I hope I get to hang out with you sometime in life. But I'm asking, we kind of in that field of truth and beauty, but what it also belongs in there is humor. you've talked
yeah.
about wit and all, but yeah, my friend Hugh Romney, known to many as Wavy Gravy, is known for saying, when you lose your sense of humor, it's just not funny anymore. I wonder if you would say something where humor fits in with all of this, because there are all the same levels that are in these other realms that we've talked about, in humor.
Well, it's deeply significant to me, limp, although my attempts at it frequently are. But I do think that, in a slightly serious side, I do think philosophers have missed something in an inquiry into the philosophy of humor, because again, I see it as being in the foothills of mysticism, in the same way as I see the pure mathematician and the physicist, having the ability, or the very creative ones having the ability to penetrate into the implicate layer and see, vision, glimpse the nature of something in there. Then I think humor resides in there as well, and it's that moment of getting the joke, which I hope I'm not, for the professional philosophers and others out there, I'm not talking complete garbage, but for me there's something in that. It's that same moment of apprehension when you see the solution, you see the way the world is, and the mystic drills so much deeper. But for me, that that moment of getting the joke is in the foothills of that as well. That's my only comment on it, and perhaps it's a glimpse of the delight in the world, that we're told that. Certainly I'm again very much in the foothills of this, but those that sit in meditative contemplation for a while experience that great joy. For me, it's in there. It's in that noetic layer. It has to be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for coming in. Veronica, please come in.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, sir. This is a very energizing, awesome presentation, and I think it's a very good book from Wilber. And just in passing, yeah, when you talk so beautifully about humor, I think it's so parsimonious and so simple and elegant, just like physics is and aims to be. So they're connected, definitely. My question is, for us non-scientists, what do you think about AI, AGI, and that field of science as having an impact on the research, on the discoveries, on the aims and goals of physics?
Wow, what an interesting question. My own feeling is that it will have none, and I will develop that a little further, but try not to take too long. Firstly, I think it's not well enough understood, or what enough appreciated, that the word AI that's being used in so many quarters at the minute isn't artificial intelligence. It is linear programming, it is machine learning, it is not artificial intelligence. And no matter how much Elon Musk may say this is AI, it isn't. And that's something I come across very much at schools when I do talks. I do talks from time to time about Gödel's theorem and Roger Penrose's views on artificial intelligence. And it seems that so many of our young people who are of such a mind just assume it's a matter of time, that this conflation of consciousness with computation seems to be something that they just simply accept. And for me, that is deeply, deeply misguided and deeply, deeply a flawed approach, that consciousness is far more than simply computation. And again, the other problem, I think, for the layperson, the amateur, the non-scientist, I'm trying to think of a non-pejorative term, is that when you experience science at schools, when you get your scientific education, such as to the point you pursue it, it's treated as a closed subject. This is stuff that the dust has been settled upon. for centuries. It's never particularly portrayed as the creative subject it actually is. You know, it takes great raconteurs like Feynman to actually instill and project that creativity that the physicist requires. And again, I do think I've used this phrase before, in the foothills of mysticism. I do believe there is an aspect of reaching into intuiting the nature of reality directly in a non-rational, but that doesn't mean irrational way. And I think that's what the creative physicist does. And I do not believe that can be programmed. So from that aspect, I have to confess, I'm in the middle of writing a book at the moment. And for the first time, I turned to Wolfram Alpha to help me do an integral. And I was kind of ashamed to do it. And this did the integral for me. And I kind of felt like I was cheating because I'd always done them myself. But I understood how the production physicist who, wants to get their paper sorted and checked and everything, these are fantastic tools that they will do the mathematics for you. They will do the calculation for you. They may well create new mathematics, but they won't do it by that moment of profound intuition and understanding.
Okay.
And I think that, the physicists talk about beauty as a guide. I can't remember exactly. Oh, it was Dirac who said that, it matters more that your equations are beautiful than it is that they match with experiment. That's the bit that's quoted. He went on to say, experiment can always be an error, but if your mathematics is ugly, then it's doomed. And that is attested to so often amongst the physicists and amongst amateurs such as myself, that you've had that little personal experience. There's a profound truth in that. And I don't see, certainly not AI as it exists now, which isn't AI in terms of artificial intelligence. I'm not against the possibility that we can create consciousness in some other way, but it's not via computation, and it won't be. And I profoundly believe that any attempt to do it that way in the end is going to fail.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for your answers.
It's a view,
that's
other views out there. That's my own personal view.
Thank you.
This guy's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mike, would you like to come in? We only have a couple of minutes left, so I ask you to be brief in your question.
Responses in the chat.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, two things. I was inspired by Tamaris's cat, to quote that great mystic and physicist, Dr. Seuss, who said, there are moments when it is appropriate to say that only the cat in the hat knows about that. And I think also I heard John mention Penrose, and I know Penrose has a kind of Neoplatonic or Pythagorean view of the nature of mathematics as a separate realm in and of itself, which raises a question, and I'm here being very brief. So therefore, how do we account for physicality?
Well, in that I've had the very great pleasure of having dinner with Roger Penrose. One of the great joys in my life is for about 10 minutes, I had a conversation on physics with Penrose and held my own. Outside, outside, but just for that 10 glory. And I can confirm, he's not making this up. He is genuinely Platonist, genuinely an outside Platonist. Yes. How can we account for matter? How can we account for what was the physicality? I grope around with this dual aspect monism. I like my hero Roger Penrose's notion of a mental pole at one end and a physical pole at the other. And I think one of the physicists in the book, who may have been Eddington or someone else, I think of it as, can I put it as rigidified thought? Can I put it that way? That it is inflexible thought. That is what gives matter its regularity and its reliability and its permanence, if I can phrase it that way. All the physicists describe matter as being mind stuff. And I think by that they mean that in the end, we can only describe the material particles, the electrons, everything, in terms of very abstract mathematical equations and symmetries and everything else. They are patterns of mathematics, but they are patterns of mathematics which are quite rigid. And if mathematics is in a sense pure thought, I think thought is far more than that, but pure rationalization, then the mental realm encompasses so much more than that, and that the physical realm is just a subset of it, where the thinking and the mathematics is rigid. That's really groping around. I don't know if it makes any sense or
Can I
resonates.
ask you one more question? And that is, what did
Not as hard as that one.
No, this will be much more challenging.
Oh, sure.
I'm just wondering what you and Penrose had for dessert.
I don't remember because it's about 30 years ago.
Thanks.
Oh, well, we're
Mike.
back to the cat.
I think the main course was pasta.
Oh, very
I
good.
don't know about the dessert. I'll
Thank
tell
you.
you the other story sometime. I've also had dinner with Stephen Hawking. That's another story.
You mean Stephen? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hawking, yeah.
Well, thank
Okay.
you so much, Jonathan. This has been an incredible session. And I hope thank you all for coming today. And I hope that you all enjoyed this session. Michael, I'll hand it over to you for our closing remarks, unless Jonathan, you have anything you would like to say.
Only that I'm glad that this book stimulated what appears to be such good conversations. And I hope it's made friends with a few other people out there who perhaps hadn't come across it before.
Beautiful.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Jonathan, and thanks to everyone who participated today for such a lively and enjoyable session. And this turned into a really great continuation for this series. We have a few, maybe more than a few announcements before we go. The next installment of our Book a Month Club series will take place on Tuesday, March 19th. We'll be going over Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse with hosts David Schrum and Caroline Pollock. Our Future Mind series continues on Wednesday, February 28th, with Christoph Koch and Alex Gomez-Marin. Our online series, Theories of Consciousness, Making Sense of a Field in Revolt and Revolution, continues this weekend and the next. We have 4 two-hour sessions over the next 2 weekends left, and feel free to sign up for either the remaining ones or even pieces of ones that you find interesting. We are also happy to announce that our June in-person events are available for registration. June 4th through 11th, we have Consciousness for Real, towards the new science of human experience. And then June 13th through the 20th, we have Gentle Action, a gathering of shared experience. Both events are taking place in Pari, Italy. And for more information, on all of these events and other ones, please visit the Pari Center website at https://paricenter.com and click on the events tabs at the top. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.